The Belgian Malinois hit the end of his lead with enough force to rock Master Corporal Brett Kaminsky back on his heels, and every person in the waiting area of West Shore Veterinary Services took an involuntary step toward the wall. The dog's name was Kane. He was a 6-year-old military police K9 attached to CFB Esquimmalt's base security squadron, and until 4 months ago, he had been the most decorated working animal on Vancouver Island. Now he was a coiled, snarling catastrophe in a tactical harness, and the veterinary clinic that had agreed to see him was rapidly regretting the decision. "Back up," Kaminsky ordered, his voice stripped to the flat command tone of someone who had spent a decade issuing orders in conditions that did not allow for repetition. His left forearm was wrapped twice in the reinforced lead, and the tendons in his wrist stood out like cables under pressure. "Everybody back up and give him a wall." Kane didn't wait for the staff to comply. He lunged again, this time at Dr. Paul Birch, the clinic's senior veterinarian, who had made the mistake of stepping forward with a clipboard. The dog's teeth snapped the air close enough to the clipboard's edge that the plastic corner cracked, and Dr. Birch jerked back so fast he nearly went over a chair. "He's wearing a muzzle," one of the vet assistants said from behind the reception desk, her voice thin with controlled fear. "The muzzle slows him down," Kaminsky said without looking at her. "It doesn't stop him, trust me on that." Nobody in the room moved. The fluorescent overheads hummed. Kane stood at the center of the linoleum, his dark eyes sweeping the room in tight, frantic arcs, his breathing fast and ragged, every muscle in his compact, powerful body broadcasting a single message. "I will go through every one of you if I have to." 3 months earlier, during a routine force-on-force training exercise at the base, a flashbang grenade had detonated at close range on Kane's left side. The handlers had rushed him to the base medical officer immediately. No lacerations, no fractures, cleared for light duty within the week. But Kane was never the same after that. The aggression started small. A snap at a handler who reached over his left shoulder to clip a leash. A violent lunge at a training instructor who had approached from his left flank without announcing himself. Within 6 weeks, Kane had bitten 2 people, sent a third to the base infirmary, and been formally flagged as a liability. The base veterinary officer had run standard behavioral assessments. The conclusion was unanimous: severe stress-induced aggression, unpredictable threat profile, no viable rehabilitation pathway. Kaminsky had refused to sign the euthanasia authorization 3 times. His commanding officer had stopped asking and started ordering. Today was the last appointment. Dr. Birch had agreed to perform a final behavioral assessment before the decision became irreversible. But that assessment had lasted approximately 90 seconds before Kane had made his position on the matter absolutely clear. "I'm going to have to sedate him," Dr. Birch said, his voice carefully level, already retreating toward the dispensary hallway. "There's no other way to conduct a safe examination. I can't put my staff in harm's way." Kaminsky's jaw tightened. He stared at the wall over Kane's head and said nothing for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped into something quieter and uglier than his command tone. Something that wasn't anger at all. "He's not a broken weapon," he said. "He's just—" He stopped, started again. "He saved 3 people in Kandahar. Did the citation say that? Because I can tell you exactly how many times this dog ran toward the thing everyone else was running away from." "I understand that," Dr. Birch said, and he genuinely meant it, which only made the situation worse. "But understanding that doesn't change what I'm seeing right now." Standing beside the instrument trolley near the far window, close enough to observe and far enough to be easily overlooked, was Elora Finch. She was 27 years old in her 3rd year of a veterinary degree at the University of Prince Edward Island, currently completing a clinical placement at West Shore as part of her program requirements. She had been at the clinic for 9 weeks. She was quiet by professional habit and personal preference, the kind of person who learned more by watching than by talking. And she had been watching Kane for the past 12 minutes with an intensity that had nothing to do with academic curiosity. She was not looking at his teeth. She was not looking at his posture, or his hackles, or any of the obvious theatrics of his aggression. She was watching the geometry of it. Every lunge, every snap, every explosive surge toward a staff member, they all came from the same side, not toward whoever startled him, not toward whoever moved first, toward whoever had come from his left. Dr. Birch emerged from the dispensary with a tranquilizer syringe, not a dart gun, but the intent was the same. Kaminsky, I need you to shorten the lead and hold him still. I'll administer the sedative directly. It'll be faster. Kane saw the syringe. He didn't know what it was, but he understood the shift in the room. The purposeful movement, the positioning of bodies, the sense of something closing in. He went from agitated to frantic in the space of a breath, slamming himself against the lead in a frenzy that made the fire exit sign above the door rattle in its mounting. Kaminsky wrapped both hands around the lead and braced like he was anchoring a ship in a storm. Wait. The word wasn't loud, it wasn't a shout or a command, but it cut through the noise with a strange, precise clarity, the way a single wrong note cuts through an orchestra, and both Kaminsky and Dr. Birch turned to look at the young woman walking slowly away from the instrument trolley. Finch, Dr. Birch said immediately, step back, this is not a situation for students. I know. Elora didn't look at him, her eyes were fixed on the dog. But I think you're about to sedate an animal for the wrong reason. Kaminsky's head came around sharply. His expression was the specific kind of unfriendly that military personnel develop for civilians, who say inadvisable things in high-stakes situations. Who are you? Veterinary student. Placement. She kept moving slowly, angling to her right, to Kane's right. His aggression pattern is directional. He has never lunged at anyone approaching from his right side, only his left. That's not, Dr. Birch began. Watch the tape, Elora said simply. Your waiting room has a security camera. I've been watching it for 9 weeks and I can tell you right now, every incident tonight has come from his left side. Every one. The room was quiet for 3 seconds. Even if that's true, Kaminsky said carefully, what does it tell you? It tells me he can't hear from his left side, Elora said. The words landed like something dropped on a hard floor, heavy and flat and impossible to unhear. The flashbang, she continued, her voice even, her steps still slow and measured and aimed at nothing threatening. Concussive blast, close range, left side exposure, you said. The base medical cleared him. Standard examination won't catch unilateral sensorineural hearing loss in a working dog. They're not looking for it. Nobody looked for it. And for 3 months, every time a handler has reached for him from his left side, he hasn't heard them coming. He's been ambushed, over and over and over, by the people he trusts. Kaminsky went very still. The lead went slack by 1/2 an inch without him meaning it to. Finch, I need you to step back right now, Dr. Birch said, and there was genuine alarm in his voice now. If he's already triggered. He's not triggered, Elora said quietly. He's exhausted. She had positioned herself at Kane's 2 o'clock, his right side. She crouched low, making herself small, her hands open at her sides, her gaze angled slightly away from his face. Not submissive, just non-confrontational, the way you signal to a frightened animal that you are not the threat. Kane's head had turned toward her the moment she started moving. He hadn't lunged. His ears were pitched forward, not flattened. He was reading her. You want to get yourself mauled, Kaminsky said, but the anger had drained out of his voice. Something raw had taken its place. I want to show you something, Elora said. And then I want you to remember what I'm about to show you. And I want you to think about the last 3 months. She reached slowly into the breast pocket of her scrub top and produced nothing. No tool, no syringe, no equipment. She held up her right hand in a precise, deliberate gesture, 4 fingers together, thumb tucked, palm angled outward, A standard CFB K9 handler signal. Stand down. She held it at Kane's eye level, his right eye, the side that could hear, the side that worked. Kane went rigid. Then, in a movement so different from everything else he had done in the last 12 minutes that it seemed almost like the light in the room had changed, he sat down. Not collapsed, not surrendered, sat. The controlled, clean sit of a trained animal responding to a known command. His breathing slowed, his ears shifted back to neutral. The desperate, frantic energy of an animal trapped in an ambush it couldn't escape simply left him. The receptionist made a sound she immediately covered with her hand. Kaminsky's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "How did you know that signal?" "My brother was a K9 handler," Elora said. She had not moved, her hand was still extended. Kane was watching it with an attention that had nothing in it anymore except recognition. CFB Trenton, 2nd Battalion. She reached up slowly with her left hand and snapped her fingers once, sharply, close to Kane's left ear. Nothing, not a flicker, not a twitch. Then she moved her left hand across to his right side, out of his peripheral vision, and snapped again. Kane's head whipped right immediately, ears pivoting, nose working. She let her hands drop. "He's deaf in the left ear," she said. "Probably has been since the flashbang. He's not aggressive. He's been defending himself against attacks he could not see coming, from people who were supposed to be safe, and nobody told him it was going to be okay, because nobody knew what was actually wrong." The room was absolutely, completely silent. And then Kane took one careful step toward Elora Finch, lowered his massive head, and pressed his face against her knee. He didn't make a sound. He didn't need to. The whole weight of 3 months of bewildering, unceasing pain was in the way he leaned into her leg, not demanding comfort, not even certain he deserved it, just resting against the first thing in months that had approached him without becoming something to fight. Elora sat down on the linoleum without a word and put both arms around his neck, careful of his ears, careful of his harness, and he let her. Kaminsky crossed the waiting room in 4 steps and went down on one knee beside them. His hand hovered over the dog's back for a moment, then settled there. Kane didn't flinch. He exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep, and pushed his weight into Kaminsky's leg. 3 months, Kaminsky said. His voice was wrecked. "I thought. The trainers said he was broken. They said his temperament was gone. I kept telling them he wasn't, but I couldn't." He stopped, started again. "I was pulling him away from every handler who came near him. I thought I was protecting him. I was making it worse. Every time I yanked that lead, I was coming at him from his left side. I was one of the things scaring him." "You didn't know," Elora said. "That's not an excuse." "It's not an excuse, it's just true." She was still holding the dog. Her chin was resting on top of Kane's head. "You can't respond to what you can't see." Dr. Birch had set the syringe down on the reception desk. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets and the careful, slightly stunned expression of someone recalculating several firmly held assumptions at once. "We need to get him into imaging," he said finally, his voice quiet and professional, and a full register lower than it had been 5 minutes ago. "I want an audiology assessment and a full cranial MRI before we do anything else. If there's been any secondary pressure on the auditory nerve from the blast, we need to know the extent." "Yeah," Kaminsky said roughly. "Yeah, Doc, let's do that." He looked at Elora, and there was nothing of the hard military flatness left in his face. "Thank you," he said. "I don't have a better word for it. Thank you." The doors to the clinic slid open. None of them had heard a vehicle outside. None of them had heard footsteps. But the sound of the automatic doors brought all 3 of them around, and the woman who stepped through them brought the kind of presence with her that made rooms realign without any conscious effort on anyone's part. She was in her mid-50s, trim and straight-backed in her Canadian Forces service uniform, the rank insignia of a warrant officer on her sleeve. She carried a manila envelope under one arm, the kind that had clearly been opened and resealed more than once. Her face was weathered and precise, and her eyes, when they landed on Elora, went through a sequence of emotions too complex to name quickly. "You're Elora Finch," she said. Not a question. Her voice was flat and controlled in the way of someone managing something they had spent a long time preparing to say. Elora stood. Kane stayed at her feet, watching the new arrival without aggression, without alarm, his right ear tracked toward her voice. "Yes," Elora said carefully. "Do I know you?" "Warrant Officer Gwen Thorvald. I was Patrick Finch's section commander at Trenton. I drove down from Victoria this morning." She glanced at Kane on the floor, then at Kaminsky, then back to Elora. "I got the incident report on this animal 2 hours ago. I've seen these symptoms before. I came to stop a euthanization." The name hit the room like a stone dropped into still water. Elora's face didn't change. Something in her eyes did. "Patrick," she said quietly, one word, just his name. Gwen Thorvald held out the envelope. Elora took it. Her hands did not shake, but they were not entirely steady either. She opened the flap and withdrew the papers inside, a stack of field medical reports, some with their edges soft from age and handling, and a second stack that was newer, stamped in red with the words "Recourse Review. Correction pending." "Your brother's K9, Thorvald said. Bolt." Elora's breath caught so quietly that only Kaminsky, who was standing closest to her, heard it. Bolt had been Patrick's dog for 4 years. He'd gone everywhere with Patrick: the deployment to Latvia, the operational support mission in Mali, the 6 months they'd spent at a forward operating base that Patrick never talked about directly, but that Elora had assembled a picture of from the silences in his letters. When they came home, Bolt had been different, unpredictable. "Dangerous," the handlers said. He'd bitten 2 people and been deemed unrehabilitable within 8 weeks of returning to Canada. Patrick had been told it was PTSD, that the deployment had broken something in the dog that couldn't be fixed, that Bolt had been euthanized humanely, and that Patrick should take some leave and see the base counselor. Patrick had taken 3 years of leave from himself, in the way that some people do, quietly and privately, and then he hadn't come back from it. "There was a field medic's note," Thorvald said, her voice steady and deliberate and clearly costing her something, "written in Mali. It noted suspected hearing damage in Bolt's left ear following a controlled blast during a clearance operation. The note was filed with the wrong unit's post-action medical records. It sat in an archive for 6 years. Elora was reading. Her eyes moved across the pages, but her face had gone somewhere far away and very interior. "When Patrick came to me," Thorvald continued, 3 months before he died, he told me he'd never forgiven himself for Bolt. He said the dog had been loyal for 4 years in conditions most people couldn't survive, and the one time Bolt needed someone to understand what was wrong with him, nobody did. He believed it was his fault, that he should have seen it, that he should have fought harder. He didn't know, Elora said. Her voice was almost inaudible. "No, he didn't know." Thorvald paused. "But the records correction I filed this morning means that somebody does now, and I watched the incident report on this animal come across my desk, Corporal Kaminsky, and I have read these words before. Unilateral aggression, startle response, cleared physically, no rehabilitation pathway." Her voice tightened on the last phrase. "I was not going to let this dog go the same way Bolt went, and I was not going to let his handler carry what your brother carried." The silence in the clinic was different now. Not frightened, not tense. Something older and heavier and ultimately more bearable than either of those things. Kaminsky was looking at the floor. His hand was still resting on Kane's back. Elora lowered the papers slowly to her side. One tear had tracked down her left cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "Patrick never stopped loving that dog," she said. Even after, he talked about Bolt like he was still." She stopped, breathed. He would have given anything to know it wasn't the deployment that broke him, that it was just something physical, something that could have been fixed. "I know," Thorvald said. "That's why I'm here." Dr. Birch stepped quietly forward. "If you'll give me a few minutes to prepare the imaging suite," he said, his voice carefully gentle, the voice of a professional who understood when to step back from the clinical and be simply human for a moment. "I'd like to run that MRI now. I want to see exactly what we're dealing with in that auditory canal before we make any treatment decisions." Kane was taken through to the imaging suite with far less difficulty than anyone had anticipated. He walked on Elora's right side, close to her leg, his head slightly low and his gait careful, still favoring the defensive posture of an animal that had learned the world could hurt. But he went. He let the technicians position him. He went under light sedation, without the frantic battle that everyone had been bracing for, because Elora stayed where he could see her, and she kept her right hand visible, and he had decided, in the particular wordless way that dogs decide things permanently and completely, that she was safe. The results came back 40 minutes later. Dr. Birch pointed to the imaging screen with the end of his pen. Total sensorineural hearing loss in the left ear. The cochlear nerve took significant trauma from the pressure wave. It's not structural damage that we can repair, but it's definitive. It explains everything. The peripheral audiogram on his right ear is actually excellent for his age. He's been functioning on one functioning ear for 3 months, and every person who came at him from his deaf side, he experienced as a silent, unexpected threat. Kaminsky was standing with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on the scan images, with the expression of a man reading a verdict he both dreaded and needed. "Is there anything you can do?" "Not for the hearing itself. That's permanent." Dr. Birch turned from the screen. "But we can absolutely adapt how Kane works. He'll need a handler transition protocol, new approach and contact conventions, always from the right side, no left flank positioning, standard visual command system, rather than voice commands from distance. There are modified operational roles where that's entirely workable. He won't go back to the same duties, but there are search and assist functions where his nose and his training are worth more than perfect bilateral hearing, and where the modified protocols are standard practice." "He can keep working," Kaminsky said. It was not quite a question. "He can keep working," Dr. Birch confirmed. The sound that came out of Kaminsky was not a word. It was something rougher and more honest than words, the kind of sound that happens when relief and guilt arrive at the same moment and collide in the chest. He turned away from the room briefly, his back to everyone, his head down. Kane, who had been lying quietly on the examination table under the last fade of the light sedation, opened his eyes and looked steadily at his handler's back with the patient, entirely focused attention of a dog who has learned to watch for things that cannot be heard. Thorvald placed the corrected field report on the corner of the examination table. She looked at Elora for a long moment. "He would be proud of you," she said. "Simple, factual. No ornament on it." Elora nodded once. "I know," she said. "I think I needed to do this to know that, but I know." 6 weeks later, the light in the waiting area of West Shore Veterinary Services was the particular clean gold of a September morning on the island, and when the clinic doors opened, the dog that came through them bore almost no resemblance to the animal that had terrorized the same room 2 months before. Kane walked on Kaminsky's right side, a loose pace, ears relaxed, tail moving in the slow, easy arc of a dog with nowhere threatening to be. His new harness was a lighter rig, chest plate design, no neck pressure, bright orange side panels designating his modified operational status. He wore no muzzle. He didn't need one. Elora was behind the reception desk reviewing a patient file when she heard the doors. She looked up, and Kane saw her, from his right side, from the side that worked, and his entire body shifted into a different gear. He pulled toward her with the enthusiasm of an animal who has identified a person as permanently and irrevocably good, and Kaminsky gave the lead enough slack to let him go. The big Malinois crossed the waiting area at a controlled gallop and pressed his face into Elora's hands, tail working furiously, letting out a short, sharp bark that bounced off every surface in the clinic and made the receptionist laugh out loud and reach for a tissue at the same time. "Easy," Elora said, laughing, her hands on either side of his face. "I see you, I've got you." She crouched to his level and let him push his forehead against hers, and for a moment neither of them moved. Kaminsky stopped a few feet away, Kane's lead still looped in his hand. He was wearing civilian clothes, a grave wool sweater, work trousers, and without the formal bearing of his uniform he looked younger and considerably less invincible. He looked like a person who had spent 6 weeks sleeping better than he had in months. "He passed his modified assessment last Friday," he said. "The handler coordinator at the base wants to place him with the search and assist team over in Comox. He'll be working with a civilian SAR unit, mostly wilderness recovery. The coordinator's done the adapted protocol training. Says Kane took to it like it was something he'd always known." "He's still the same dog," Elora said. "He always was." Kaminsky looked at her. There were things in his face that hadn't been there 2 months ago. Not softness exactly, but space. Room for something that wasn't strictly armor. "Warrant Officer Thorvald sent me the corrected file on Bolt," he said. "For your records, in case you wanted it. She said you'd know what to do with it." Elora's nodded slowly. She would. She'd already spoken to a contact at the base counselor's office about whether there was a way to formally correct the record for Patrick's family. Their mother, who had never entirely believed the story she'd been told, who had kept every letter and every photograph and every piece of evidence that her son had been exactly who she knew him to be. That conversation was still ongoing. But it was happening. The silence was ending. "Tell her thank you," Elora said. "She knows," Kaminsky said, "but I'll tell her anyway." Kane sat at Elora's feet and looked up at her with his right eye, steady and dark and entirely without fear. Outside the clinic windows, the September light shifted through the arbutus trees along the drive, and the morning went on being ordinary in the way that mornings do when they have no idea what they have just witnessed.